swim team member, and the coach. I could hear noises coming from the hallway. My teammates were still busy celebrating the latest win we had against the Royal Knights, our most loathed competitor. But I could also hear Cullen's harsh breathing right in my ears. Callum, my coach, was only 2 years older than me, and a most beloved ex-player of our uni. But right now, in my arms, he was nothing if not my lover. Although I pulled him close to kiss him, I also tried my best to keep my senses intact, in case someone were to storm right into the changing room any second. Our kiss was our way of celebrating the win. Even though it was a group effort, my teammates and Callum never forgot to give me the most credit. If not for Callum's gentler personality, I really would have turned out to be an arrogant arsehole with too much pride in my heart. But nothing of that really mattered right now. When I pulled back from the kiss, Callum's face was flushed and he looked happy. But he always looked that way whenever he was near me or something was about me. If he were not a coach, people really would have assumed him to be another student. He looked that young. He wrapped his arms around my shoulders and he told me congratulations again. A win was good for the team. The more we won, the better. I rubbed his cheek with a thumb, despite my fear. I really wanted to bring him home. I looked at the closed door first and then into his eyes. "All thanks to you, Callum," I said, and pressed a kiss on his cheek. "Want to come to my place today?" he asked. I sighed. My dad and mom were waiting outside, and I knew they were here to bring me home with them. It was always the case with them. I won a match. Well, time to celebrate it with my parents. It wasn't like I hated spending time with them, especially the happy moments, but there was always that dissonance between us, and it almost always seemed and felt tangible, and I hated that. Oh, how I hated that. As much as I hated spending time with them, I couldn't refuse their request either. So with another heavy sigh, I pinched Callum's cheek and informed him of the situation. He nodded and immediately pulled back when the door opened. There was enough distance between us, but our flushed faces could have given us away if not for the dim lighting. I cleared my throat and grinned. Callum stood on the other side with his hands behind his back, posture straight, and a smile on his face. The usual visage that we expected out of our coach. "Boys," Callum said, and clapped his hands to gather their attention. "Tomorrow's party is on me." The changing room soon erupted into an excited applause. "Keep this up and I might even bring you all for a trip somewhere." He nodded at me and made his way out of the room. I watched them leave before I bothered myself with keeping tabs on my teammates' conversation. Mom and Dad looked happy when I found them in the parking lot. They again had a little gift box in their hands. As usual. Now, I was not raised ungrateful, so I whispered the same words of appreciation that I always had. Mom seemed satisfied with my reaction and hurried me into the car. Dad said it was a great round, and that was it. The silence was loud between us, and I didn't even bother breaking it. I was used to it, and I guess my parents were used to it too. So as my dad drove along the road, I couldn't help but look outside the window and wonder what would have happened had I stayed with Callum. The dinner was the usual boring affair. Mom had cooked my favorite, and I thanked her for that. Then they started talking and the conversation eventually reached me. It always did. And even before they opened their mouths, I knew what it was going to be about. A comment or two on what I needed and some light-hearted faux polite argument between them. "Dylan, did you find a nice girl for yourself?" "He does not need a girlfriend right now," my dad put in his 2 cents. "He needs to focus on his training and swimming." "Dylan, your performance today was amazing, but there's still scope for improvements." Then began his half-hour lecture about all the mistakes he had noticed during the rounds. I agreed. I needed to do more to be my best. But the very fact that my dad couldn't form a single sentence of praise without a "but" just annoyed me to no end. It was always the case. It was never an exception. Even then, I bit my tongue and stayed silent. It was better that way. For some time, I would always keep my mouth in check. "I don't have a girlfriend," I replied. I was gay. I wanted to tell them. I had zero interest in girls, and it was going to stay that way for the rest of my life. But my circumstances were such that I couldn't utter those words without facing solid repercussions. And I was not in the mood for that. And yes, Dad, I will keep those in mind. "Good. Now that's my son." My dad had a proud smile on his face. What a boring evening. If I had accepted Callum's offer, we would have been kissing at this moment. When Callum's message came the same night, I couldn't help but think about how things started between us. It was nothing special or spectacular. I remembered the entire trial day and how passionate Callum looked, guiding and instructing each one of us through the process. I found his passion attractive on him. It did not help that he was so ready to be pleased and so eager to please. It was largely because of his friendliness that I was able to cope with the stress during the trial. The results were declared the same evening, and I made it to the team. After that, any interaction with Callum was easy and sometimes pre-planned, and one could always guess it began from there. Neither of us were out, however, so our first thought was to keep it a secret, and so we did. And that was how we made it this far. Holding hands and kissing were private affairs, so we decided to keep them between us for the time being. He had his position to take care of, and I had, well, my parents, obviously. That did not mean our relationship was moving smoothly. In fact, it was more often than not that we argued and fought. Largely, that was because of how forthcoming I had to be with girls whenever they flirted with me. Callum did not really need to face that. He was a senior and the coach. Rarely people approached him with romance in their heads, but it was different for me. And that was why we often argued. But we easily made up too. The next day during the party, Callum approached me with his usual coach swag to ask how my day was going. Because we were surrounded by my teammates and everyone else in between, we kept our distance, but that did not stop us from leaving sneaky light touches on each other's arms and legs, or letting our fingers graze each other's when we passed on drinks and glasses. No one really seemed to take notice of us. They were too busy with themselves. It was okay, I replied with a shout. The music was loud enough to drown our voices, and so it made sense when we leaned in close to each other to share our words. I believe no one was to assume anything with that. Callum gave me a small smile. He knew how it was. I missed you, he said. I grinned. I liked it when Callum was so open about his feelings. Maybe I can stay tonight? Would you like that? That'd be great, actually. He checked the time. We can leave soon. My friends were still out, so I didn't really think any of that was possible. They were sure to spend some $100 before calling it a night. It didn't help that it wasn't their money. For a little moment, I was grateful Callum earned good. This party itself would have left him broke if not for his salary. I'm going to the washroom, he told me, and then he grinned before he left the place. I knew that was a signal, so I looked around the area, waited for a good 5 minutes before informing the closest teammate that I was going to the washroom. He dismissed me and returned to whatever he was doing. I walked into the washroom to see Callum waiting for me. When I walked closer, he pulled me into one of the stalls, and I barely managed to lock it before we were kissing. He told me he missed me, and I probably returned the sentiment. I couldn't for the life of me remember my reply, because it was not even 5 minutes into our kissing session that someone somewhat drunk stumbled into the washroom and into one of the stalls. Callum and I stilled for a second. We had to make sure it wasn't one of ours. We heard him flushing, walking out of the stalls, washing his hands, and singing some tunes to himself. Callum was still in my arms, and I could feel his fearful and labored breathing against my neck. I tried to rub off some of the nervousness with careful strokes against the small of his back, but it barely seemed to work. And it was then that reminded me that he had more stake than me? Yes. When the person walked out of the washroom, Callum stepped away from me. I think we should go before someone else comes, he suggested. I nodded and left the stall first to check if there was someone else. I stood beside the sink and watched him correct his posture and steady his breathing before he could come out. One of my teammates, Thomas, walked in. He looked at me in amazement. Dude, was it you in that stall? He asked. I shrugged and coughed. Callum was still in the stall, and the door was ajar. If my teammate wanted, he could easily check it for someone else. Then, where's the coach? He asked and grabbed his phone from the sink. I forgot this, haha. Fuck, drinking sucks out everything out of you. I don't know, I answered. Ned said the coach went to the washroom, but I didn't see him. Maybe he's in the back, smoking? I guess. Come on, Dylan, he said, pocketing his phone. We all know our coach doesn't smoke. Anyways, I'll go look for him. I watched him walk out of the washroom with bated breath. He was so very close to finding out the truth, and it was only because he was drunk that he didn't see Callum's small reflection in the mirror. If he had, I didn't know what explanation I would have pulled out for myself. You can come out, I said softly. To my amazement, I did not seem to notice the shaking in my hands, but Callum's nervousness was very obvious to me. I understood it was easier to notice fear in others than in oneself. Callum nodded and walked out slowly. He seemed worried, and his face was flushed. I knew for a fact that it wasn't because we had kissed merely 5 minutes ago. Was it Thomas? He asked. I nodded. He was looking for you. Yes, I heard, with droopy shoulders. He walked to the sink and washed his hands. Are you okay? I asked. He nodded. Then a minute later, he shook his head. I don't know, Dylan. I feel like this isn't the way to live, you know? Sneaking around and fearing people finding us. I hate it so much. I want this to change. As much as I understood his frustration, I didn't think it was necessary to let anyone know what was going on between us. It was a private matter, and I believe we weren't even ready. Dating a student, no matter if it was only 2 years younger, wouldn't look good on Callum. He would be dealt with in a manner that would certainly harm his young career. For me, it was more about keeping my relationship with my parents in check. They wouldn't like to know I was gay, and I didn't want to fumble anything. I just needed their financial support, and I was willing to keep my mouth shut for the time being. I think we can wait, I answered, and resolutely did not look at him. I knew he was upset long before he spoke up. How long? I want to come out on my own terms and not someone else's, Dylan, he sighed. You think they would like to hear you're gay? I asked, a little annoyed now. Just when Callum was about to reply, Thomas walked into the washroom again with a bunch of words already in his mouth. Midway, however, when he noticed Callum there. Coach, he said, I was looking everywhere for you, and here you are. How? When did you come? Callum sighed. Is there something I can help you with, Thomas? Oh yeah, Thomas rubbed a finger over his eyebrow. I just wanted to let you know, 3 of us guys are leaving already, and I'm leaving too. And thank you for today, Coach, Callum nodded. I will come with you guys too. He wiped his hands and followed after Thomas. He did not even look at me. Despite the slight irritation I was feeling, I grabbed my phone and messaged him. Can I come over to your place? Callum's message came late, but he was okay with it. I quickly left the dying party and hailed a cab to his home. Sunday morning, and it was around 10. Callum and I were still under the comforters, and I wasn't planning on letting him go until we had the necessary talk. I knew he was still upset about yesterday, and I did not want to seem like I did not care for the things that worried him. I had my arm around him to make sure he did not leave. It's just the next tournament, I began. I need funding from Dad, he rubbed his eye. I'm not forcing you to come out, Dylan. I just hate all the sneaking around. It feels like we're doing something wrong, he sighed then. Granted, it will not look good on me, but we don't have to tell anyone we are dating each other. So you just want people to know we are gay? He shrugged. Can start from there, he looked at me. We don't have to tell them we're together because that will certainly create problems. But, although he did not speak more after that, I gave it some thought when he left his house in the evening. My parents are still curious about what I was doing, roaming around on weekends instead of spending time with them, and I had little to tell them. My mind was more set on making sure Callum was feeling better. The idea of letting everyone know about our sexuality was new, so we weren't really going to act on it right away. We made plans to do so by the end of this semester. We can be a little lenient next week, Callum suggested, but from then on we will have to return to the routine. That's the only way it'll work out for the next tournament. He slipped the paper to my side. It was still afternoon and raining, so Callum suggested I stay until evening. It was sure to end by then, he said. I looked over the names of my teammates and stopped at Thomas. I looked at Callum and asked why he had highlighted his name. Oh, Thomas is really not in this form right now, he began. We will need to pay attention to him, and if he does not put up an effort. But Callum, he is essential to the team, I argued. Callum nodded. He was, he replied. But in recent times, I have observed several issues with his endurance and form. He doesn't even come to practice as often anymore. He does not seem to take it seriously, Dylan. He's focusing on his studies, I told him. But swimming is just as important, Dylan. That's how most of you guys are keeping up with the academic needs. Let's be serious. If not for swimming, several of you will fail this semester. That's low, Callum, I replied. Even though what he said was true, a couple of my teammates weren't faring well in their studies. Heck, even I was struggling with calculus, and that was why it was such a touchy subject. Callum wasn't wrong, but I felt irritated that he brought this, of all things, between us. Be honest, is it because you're worried he has figured something about us? Is that why you want him out of the team? Callum looked offended and hurt, and rightfully so. I will not play with my student's future for that. Dylan, what do you think of me? And that was why I found myself in the kitchen half an hour later. I knew what desserts Callum liked, and I assumed that was the best way to apologize to him. It barely seemed to work, and Callum asked me to leave in the evening. I decided I would talk to him on Monday. It wasn't exactly easy, because Callum had laid us off in this week. He was helping the women's team with their practice. He had to keep himself busy, and his solution was easy. Spend some time with the women's team's coach, Mrs. Emma. The men's team was free to work out, exercise, or just do whatever we wanted for this week. But I still spent my days swimming and starting and watching him interact with the women's team. It was almost funny how much he had control over me. Every so often our eyes would meet, and either he or I would glare at each other. But I wasn't upset. It was a form of teasing between us. Even if he was upset at me, I knew it would be okay when I found him looking at me several times throughout the day. It was going to be okay, I told myself. I couldn't stop the grins that would pull up on my lips after that. At least from this distance and away from my teammates. I was able to admire him. Callum was a few inches shorter than me. He had less bulk than me as well. He looked young, and that was precisely why he seemed like one of us. During his graduation years, Callum was one of the most popular students in the uni. When he graduated and started looking for jobs, the uni offered him this role. Because he had several medals and achievements under his belt, he accepted the role for the time being. But it wasn't that he was a permanent one. And we all knew that. Callum would leave whenever the uni found a better or more experienced coach. We were kind of waiting for that day to come, and secretly hoped that it would never. Callum was laid back and kind, and the team performed amazingly under his guidance. We weren't sure if we would do the same under someone else, and we didn't want to say that to Callum either. We knew he would find trouble with that mindset. Also, no one really wanted to experiment with that. When I saw Callum leave after helping Miss Emma after another session on a Thursday, I followed him to the men's changing room. I made sure no one had followed either of us before grabbing his wrist and pulling him close to kiss me. Callum seemed a little surprised, but he did not deny me the kiss. It had been time. We hadn't kissed since Sunday, and during the kiss we both seemed desperate for the familiar touch. I apologized to him and rubbed my hand over his nape. I told him I would let my parents know everything right after the tournament. It was in a few months, and we just had to wait a little more. If we won the tournament, I would be able to pay for the rest of my college years. I wouldn't need to rely on my parents, and then it would be easier to let them know about me. Callum seemed a little skeptical of that, but he agreed. He also told me that he was thinking of coming out soon, if only to make sure that women did not hit on anyone. I grinned down at him and kissed him again. Unfortunately, we were so involved in the kiss that we didn't notice Thomas walk in on us. And fuck, our position and my fear and stupidity, that when I found a shocked Thomas standing at the door, I pushed Callum away with little grace. Because Callum hadn't seen that coming, he stumbled a little into the lockers. I winced at the sound of the contact made, but could not move myself to actually check on him. I was sure to come to regret this behavior soon. What the fuck? Thomas hissed. It was him, I muttered in my defense. He misunderstood me and kissed me. Callum seemed hurt by this, but he did not say anything. He merely started dressing up in silence. I had betrayed him, and he seemed to accept it. It wasn't supposed to go like this, and despite my shame, I couldn't help but stare in silence at a devastated Callum. If he cut me off my life right this second or slapped me, I wouldn't defend myself. Heck, I wasn't going to forgive myself for the shame that littered Callum's face and body. Look, coach, Thomas began and raised his hands in surrender. I'm not homophobic, so I don't give two shits about you being, gay. But what the hell? How could you kiss your own student? And Dylan's straight. You're gross. Thomas, that's enough, I said to shut him up. I wasn't going to let him mutter stuff about Callum. Not when I was still well and alive. No, man, it's disgusting, Thomas continued. He can be gay somewhere else. Thomas, shut up, I hissed, and angrily looked at him. I'm sorry, Callum said. Then I must leave. I shouldn't have done so. I'm sorry, Dylan. I'm sorry, Thomas. Whatever, Thomas replied and made a face at him. I was very close to punching him, even though the main problem was me. If only I hadn't done what I had, none of this would have happened. They're looking for you, Dylan. Your parents. I nodded. Thomas gave me another look at Callum before leaving. For the next 5 minutes, Callum and I stood there in silence. He wasn't looking at me, but I knew he was upset and hurt. Nothing I would say at this moment would make any of this better. But that did not mean I would not make an effort to express my shame shamelessly. I reached out to him to hold his wrist, but he jerked out of my hold. Callum, I began. Sorry, I got scared and don't talk to me without a reason after this, he said. Don't contact me. Then he left. When I realized I was crying, I groaned and punched the wall. It hurt, but I knew what would hurt me most from now on. My guilt. And it remained that way for the days and weeks that came after that. Thomas had no common decency and he went around the uni telling anyone and everyone that Callum was gay. He did not say how he found out or that he had found Callum and I kissing, but by the end of the second week, almost everyone knew about him being gay. In the washroom, I often found someone leaving Callum's number on the door and on the mirror. I would wipe them away each time or complain to the janitors, but I knew the damage was done. During practice hours, I would notice Callum's phone ringing. He would come to pick up his call, mutter some word, and then angrily hang up. It was obvious he was frustrated, worried, and scarred. From the words around the block, I found that several rowdy students had found his number and were now hell-bent on harassing him in one way or the other. I tried to contact Callum, but he never looked like he wanted to talk to me, and rightfully so. But frustration was edging me on, and by the 5th week, I couldn't help but get into a little scuffle with Thomas. I made him bleed, but it was still not enough. I was still angry, and as the team's captain, I informed everyone that we were going to have a few rounds to make sure everyone was at par with the team's needs. My sole intention was to make sure Thomas left the team. I wanted him out, and I did kick him out. Thomas then went angrily claiming that maybe only Callum wasn't gay, but I was too, and that I was taking revenge for speaking the truth. I couldn't care less. In less than 2 hours, he was banned from attending any club-related activity. He promised he would bring it up to the dean, and I flipped him off. He was free to do whatever he wanted, but that did not mean problems for Callum ended. Although he was never physically hurt, according to my knowledge, he was constantly verbally and mentally abused. Several people laughed behind his back and said that they knew why he wanted to work with the men's swim team. They said it gave him the chance to ogle all the chiseled male bodies, and he was shameless enough that everyone was sure he must have made a pass at one of his students. Thankfully, Thomas hadn't revealed what he had seen. When the first month passed and we came closer to the tournament, I decided I needed to talk to Callum about everything. He was getting hurt left and right because of me. It was funny that I always assumed him to be more scared than me when it came to this, when all the time, it was me who was scared the most. Because if it wasn't so, Callum wouldn't have been facing so much ridicule. Oh, how embarrassing it was to be Dylan, the famous and most beloved swimming star. Callum did not seem to want to talk to me. He looked so angry that I wouldn't have been surprised if he had punched me. But I held his wrist and pulled him close, and did not let him go unless he gave in. At that moment, he did not look as upset as tired, and hurt as he seemed. If I couldn't help but hug him and apologize to him for everything I put him through, if I wasn't as big of a coward as I was, then I could have saved him. The feeling of regret brought tears to my eyes. Poor Callum. He had found love in the most unbecoming man ever. How irresponsible I was. Callum, baby, I'm so sorry, I whispered into his hair. He let out a few sniffles, but kept his arms around my shoulders. I rubbed his back to give him some reassurance to speak up. I knew he was upset. I wanted him to let it all out. I'm leaving this place, he said, and I could feel his tears on my neck. I've already applied to several other universities in the city. I even applied to some schools, so I'm sure I will not have to deal with this for long. I'm so sorry, I said, and rubbed his neck. It's all because of me. I don't want to deal with this anymore, Dylan. You have no idea how bad it is, he pulled back to grab his phone from his pocket. Look at the kind of messages I'm getting. I don't want this to become my life. Not everyone is this bad. I want to find those people. I cannot stay here. Callum, I can help. Please tell me if I can help with something. He shook his head. I cannot do anything. I don't even know what to say, Dylan. Just don't let anyone out you forcefully. People are not always bad, but they're not always kind. I'm lucky no one hurt me, but I don't want to stay here to find out. He pocketed his phone. It's all my mistake. Callum, I will make it better, I promise. He did not seem like he trusted me on that. After all, it was I who had made it so bad. I was the one who had kissed him that day, and I was the one who had pushed him under the bus that day. Even if it seemed scary, I did not want him to face this anymore. I did not know what I would do, but I did not want to lose Callum. He was the most important person in my life, and to lose him to homophobes would be a shame indeed. I held his hand and I kissed the inside of his wrist. In moments like this, he seemed younger than me, and though I had made one giant mistake, I wanted to rectify it, to prove that I would keep him safe no matter what. "We gonna be okay?" I asked him. "I don't know," he answered truthfully. I wanted to kiss him, but I did not know if I was allowed to, so I simply kissed his wrist again, and asked him if we were still boyfriends. He shrugged. "You hurt me, Dylan," he replied. I swallowed. "And I'm ashamed of that, Callum," he sighed. "I don't hate you, though. I get it. Maybe I would have done the same," he sniffled. "Yeah, we're still boyfriends," he said. "Really?" I asked, my eyes brightening a little. He nodded. "Just don't do that again, Dylan." "I will never," I replied. "Because if you do, we'll not come back." I swallowed. "I promise I will never do anything to hurt you. And this will take some time too." This meant forgiving me, and I agreed. I was ready to give him as much time and space as he wanted. I knew what he went through was as horrid as it could get, and I didn't want to interfere in however he wanted to deal with that. I nodded with tears in my eyes. Again, I promised him I wasn't going to hurt him, and thankfully, luck seemed to be on my side. Callum did not stop seeking other uni schools or a good position with a good salary, nor did the teasing and harassment stop. When a couple of my teammates and I complained to the college authorities about it a few weeks later, they promised to take action against such students. After that, things seemed to calm down a little. It was still bad, but not as bad as it was weeks ago. The semester ended and the tournament season started rolling in. The first 3 weeks of the new semester were going to be spent in these tournaments. Dad had already paid for everything, so it was only needed to make sure our team won. Thankfully, under Callum's guidance and our team's effort, that possibility seemed legit. In the days leading up to the tournaments, I bought Callum to little dates to strengthen our relationship and make up for my mistakes and foolishness. Because the time was limited, we almost always had to hurry, but all in all, it seemed to work out between us. Callum started looking a little more trusting of me, and I fell a little more in love with him. I still had a long way to go before Callum trusted me the way he did before all of that, but I was really willing to deal with any such issue for him. I made a mistake, and I was ready to be punished for that. Callum had every right to forgive me whenever and however he wanted. The tournament finally arrived. To skip the best part, we did it. It was a slight win. The score margin was scary to look at, but it worked out in our favor. Among all the cheering and happy faces, I searched for no one but Callum. When I found him, clapping and standing, I stalked up to him and did what I was sure none had expected out of me. I grabbed him around his waist, thanks to his small height, and kissed him in front of everyone. For a small second, everyone and everything around us went silent, before a big round of applause began again. Some of them might have been homophobes, but most enjoyed two guys kissing. Obviously, my parents weren't the two of those people, and so they were ready with their own set of problems. But at the moment, the only thing that seemed important to me was Callum. Thankfully, I seemed just as important to him when we pulled back from the kiss. He told me he had found a job at a community college. It did not pay as much, but it would be a relief to get away from this uni. Although I did not want to let him go, I knew he deserved that kind of peace. It's going to be a lot different, but I still want to get away. I nodded and rubbed a hand over his hair. Maybe we can celebrate it. Yeah? He asked, his mouth set in a sweet grin. I nodded. Yeah. And really, for the most part, things remained the same between us. The only difference was that everyone now knew Dylan, their beloved swimming star, was gay, and very much in love with their ex-coach, Callum. Conclusion. Callum joined the community college the next semester. He complained more often than not about how different the experience was, but he did agree that the students were mostly the same, and he liked guiding them on their experience, so it was a grand win for him. Our relationship got better and better as the months rolled by. We did not really get as much time as we usually got, but it still seemed to work out. We met on weekends and kissed whenever we had the time. He seemed to get better now, and liked hearing stories about how my life was at the college. I had several people throwing insults at me too, but they were expected. My parents, well, now they hated me. They did not cut me off, but they kept their distance. Although I missed them, I was sure they would turn around on their own. I wasn't going to push them. The end. Coming out is a personal decision and a life-changing experience. Even then, exposing someone's sexual identity remains legal, despite how it affects the victim. Is it possible for us to establish a code of conduct to protect this right of individuals, even if there are no legal repercussions? Let us know in the comments down below. Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing to become part of our Rainbow Force and stay wholesome.